everyone, it's Susanne here from the Project Manager Clinic, and today we've got a fantastic conversation happening with an expert, and our expert is going to talk to us about turning connections into alliances, the win-win formula. And Cassandra Mok is who we're talking to, and she is a transformation and change adoption, leadership and organisational change person, or she's a leadership coach, basically. Well, you might want to sort that out in a second, Cassandra, and tell people a little bit more about yourself. But this is a really interesting conversation because you and I talked a little bit last year before one of the other podcasts that we did or webinars that we did. And one of the things that really got me was that you said that people should now at least know or see it's actually a good skill to develop genuine political savvy. And it's not a dirty word. And it has been a lot as a thing. People would say, oh, I work in a place that's very political, blah, 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 meaning that's not good. But it can be very good. And if you watch The West Wing, which is that show that was on quite some time ago, it's very, very interesting. Anyway, that's another discussion. So welcome, Cassandra. Tell me a little bit about yourself and if I got all of that right or not.
Oh, yeah. I wear a lot of different hats, so that's fair. In summary, I do organizational development and leadership, working with people on how to themselves become more effective leaders, but also the systems and the processes that go around and create an environment that helps people achieve their best or to create change, particularly social change.
Right. So just to talk a little bit more about that, because you just said social change, and quite often we hear a lot about organisational change. What's the difference between what you're doing and what organisational change or a change manager does?
Yeah, okay. So with social change, it is the larger society, so it's communities. So there are slightly different structures. For example, in an organization, you have a chart that someone says this person is on top of this person and this person is responsible for this and so responsible for that. But in a society, you might have particular roles, like you might have a doctor or you might have a lawyer or something like that. But there's no inherent like, oh, these people are responsible for this and these people are responsible for that, and these people are have the right to choose what happens to other people and get rid of them in society. That's a human rights violation. Right?
Yeah.
So when you are looking at social change, there are more factors in terms of underlying cultural dynamics. There is movements, age groups, different perspectives on what is an ideal society. There are sometimes competing and fluid priorities. Whereas, for example, most companies, especially if they're on the stock exchange, it's mostly stock value. Right?
Yeah.
There's a clear metric of why that thing exists, whereas a society exists as a group of people, and we have to decide how we function together. So authorities can change quite quickly, as we can see globally. There's, and people can use different tactics. So, I mean, in some ways, organizations are a microcosm of society, but obviously because there are more, I guess, artificial structures brought onto an organization. An organization generally doesn't exist unless, there's some paperwork or there's some agreement to work together. Whereas a society is your neighbor. You don't necessarily choose or decide, and people just live there and things like that.
I get you now. Yes, because most organisations, and probably going back 10 or 15 years when it used to be the big four or the big six, and I won't mention who they were, but they're consulting accounting companies. And they would often talk about, we've got to have the right people. We've got to have the people that have our cultural fit. And what I would notice was, I used to work for the New South Wales government for quite some time. And I would say, oh, here they come. You can see them coming in. Look at them. They'll be Deloitte or they'll be McKinsey, whoever they were, right? You could tell just by the way they were walking in to that organisation without them even introducing themselves. So they had a real air of that organisation, I guess, that they were working with. And I always found that fascinating because when I had my own company, Synergy Management Solutions, we had a few things that we wanted to build in as our culture. But I always had this belief that I could basically hire virtually anybody to do a role. So, of course, they had to have certain attributes and skills, but they didn't have to be super qualified as this or that or the other. And what I found was that actually worked really well. And my organisation had a really nice blended culture where people respected each other, and it really wasn't very hard. Like, we weren't working hard at it. Not that we were an enormous organisation, but we weren't working really hard at it to keep us all together. And I think one of the things was because we're a consulting company and we were mid-tier consulting company, we would always have to go out to other companies, of course, and my people would notice the difference. So tell me a little bit more about that dirty concept of political savvy, because it's got to still be there.
Yeah,
in
and
organisations.
I would say that the challenge is that people react to the word and they're like, oh, my office is really political, right? Or there's office politics. So they're not talking about being politically savvy. That's like a different way that we're talking about it now, because people have such a visceral reaction to politics, right? And it is seen as negative, and it's seen as something to be avoided, something that's bad or toxic and things like that.
Yeah.
Whereas, actually, if you think about what it is and the behaviors that are coming about, now it's about relationships, and it's about influence, and it's about power dynamics, and using those and being aware of those to get outcomes, right? Now, people don't like it when they think the tactics are underhanded or they think it's unethical. And often when people say, oh, like my office is political, or, it's like a bit sensitive politically, what they mean is it's not good. It's the bad kind, right? As opposed to thinking of understanding how the politics works is a tool, and a tool can be used for good or for bad, but we tend to only think of it in the negative. And when we see it going wrong, right? We don't tend to see the same things, which again is building relationships, knowing what's important to people, being able to articulate that and make people see things in a particular way, or making people feel things in a particular way as being, a good thing, right? People tend to think, oh, when it's something that they didn't like the outcome, or they thought it was an unethical way of doing it, and a bit like manipulative or something like that. So that's where it becomes a bit of an awkward thing, because if people say, well, I'm getting smart about the politics in my office, that might sound like they're starting to play that unethical version of the game that they do not like.
That's right? Sucking up to somebody's bosses or whatever. That's generally what people sort of associate political savvy, I guess, with.
Yeah, exactly. And exactly that. We say sucking up, right? But what's the difference between sucking up and bonding?
Yeah.
Right?
Well, I think if it's weaponized maybe against somebody else, I think that's where it becomes a problem. Because you're also talking about influencing, the ability to influence other people. Does that mean that you have to have a pretty good idea of who you are before you start to do those sorts of things? And before we started this, you talked a bit about the coaching things that you do, and it's quite rounded. It's quite a holistic approach.
Yeah, so I guess getting into that, I mean, it's always about intention, right? So, if you are intending to do something, now, if people disagree with you and they don't have any buy-in to it, they're going to think that you're just trying to push your own will for no good reason. Right? And
Yep.
so that can seem, and especially if they're quite good at just picking on who holds the control and the power and not bringing other people along on the journey, then they can also be seen to be a bit underhanded type thing.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So again, it's one of those things that's like sometimes people, when they use these skills, again, they're just skills, in particular ways, it can also be seen as quite negative, as opposed to, getting buy-in, getting relationships, understanding people, what motivates them, why they might care, right?
Right.
So absolutely, as you mentioned, it is important for people to know themselves first. The reason is because, you know what goes inside your own head. It's very hard to say, oh, you can learn to read other people if you don't know how to read yourself when you have all of the access to the inside dark bits.
Yes, exactly.
So I think one of the first skills is people who are more aware of themselves and where they sit and how people respond to them and what they're projecting and, what they like is step number one.
Right.
Then, of course, the second step is to recognize that not everybody's going to react and like the same things that you like. You might like chocolate. Somebody else might like Rocky Road. They might like, green tea, whatever it is. So I think then the second step is to recognize, okay, this is my preferences. So the chances are you either operate based on your own preferences or you operate on something that you've been accustomed to dealing with somebody else's preferences. So generally, if you're talking about people as they've grown up, it's, their parents, their family, their educational system,
Right.
early bosses, things like that, that will guide sort of your expectations on what was correct. Yeah. And
Right.
so people tend to have a default, and being aware of when you use your default, what is your preference, and therefore being able to say, well, is this default not working for me? I can try something else and I'm going to experiment with something else. And that's where really, it's learning to know yourself, but also learning to observe other people so that you can adapt, right?
Yeah.
And being able to listen differently and listen for the things that might not be said, and then saying, okay, well, what is important to this other person?
So when you say that, sorry to interrupt you there, but when you said listen to what the other person said and maybe in the way that they said it, so I mean we're all supposed to be a bit intuitive and observational as project managers and consultants, but I'm just wondering if it's more than that. What you're saying, it's being aware of what's being said in the context of where you are, in the context of that political environment, or is that more what you're talking about?
The background. So, for example, just because what is said isn't what is meant, we always use that term reading between the lines.
Yeah.
What are some of these underlying beliefs? So when they say something, they could say the same sentence, right? Like if they say, oh, you've lost some weight. Now,
Yeah.
is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Yes.
Depends.
Yes.
If you're trying to go on a diet, then that's a good thing.
Yeah.
If you're unwell and you're on chemo, not a great thing.
No, not so good.
So there is context as well in terms of understanding, and it's the immediate context, right? Like, what are we doing right now? Where are we right now? Something like that. But there's also like historical, personal background that might color what is being said. So when we're specifically talking about reading between the lines, there's a little bit of what does this mean for this person, considering who they are. Because if you just took everything on face value,
yes,
right, that's where you could run into trouble. Because if you said, oh, you've lost weight, am I complimenting you? Or am I worried about you? Or what's going on?
Yeah, exactly. Like one of the things that we said, or you said in the précis for all of this, was effective leaders go beyond surface level storytelling. They understand stakeholder dynamics, and that's, I guess, what you're starting to get into a little bit now. Craft strategies that resonate. This fascinates me, and tailor their approach to persuade thoughtfully and ethically. And you sort of touched on those a little bit before, but I'm really interested in the crafting stories, and that can also have negative connotations, the story word, storytelling, to craft strategies that resonate. So can you tell me a bit more about that? Is that just for that person? Is that for a strategy or vision for the organization? How is that working?
The short answer is, because people love short answers sometimes, all of it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. Right.
So again, it depends on who your audiences are. So when you're
Yeah,
speaking to an individual, right? Like if you were speaking to a toddler, you wouldn't speak the same way that you would speak to,
true.
your mother-in-law, for example.
Yeah.
Right? So there's one as the audience, but often in organizations as leaders, we are speaking to more than one person at a time in multiple different forms.
Yeah.
And even within the same meeting, people will walk away with incredibly different messages.
I know. Staggering.
So why is that? Sometimes it's because they're, checking their emails and doing something else at the same time. But sometimes it's because of where people place emphasis. People place more emphasis on tone. Some people place more emphasis on the actual words spoken. Right? So if
Right.
your tone and your language don't match, then
Oh.
sometimes people can walk away with different messages. So if I come in to a thing and be like, we have great news, we've just won $1 million contract.
Yeah, it doesn't compute, does it? No.
Yeah.
Mm.
So sometimes there is a checking in multiple times, same message, and leaders often wonder this, especially during change. They're like, but surely we've communicated this already.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's that thing that says, well, whatever you think you've communicated, you're probably not enough. Yeah. But then people
Yes.
also get irritated and they say, you've over communicated and we're so sick of hearing this.
Right.
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 So it's that there are some people who are paying attention always in class, let's say. So they hear the message over and over again. And you've got some people
Yeah.
who it didn't land quite right with them. So this is where going back to the listening part is sometimes if as a leader and as a change manager or a project manager, it's always a one-way communication that's dumping on people.
Yeah.
You can see how that might not be effective because
Mm.
communication isn't what I say. Communication is what the person understands on the other side.
Whoa. Wow. Okay, that's really important. I don't think that's widely understood, Cassandra.
We spend
No.
way too much time talking about our public speaking skills
Yeah.
and enunciation and things like that, and
Yeah.
marketing and picking the right words.
That's fascinating. So just a little example of something that's happened to me recently. So I upset someone close to me, which I do quite often. That's just being autistic, I think, is part of it. But they had said to me, I gave you two opportunities to apologise to me. And I thought, oh, I don't remember two opportunities. I remember them under their breath saying, as they were walking away, they should, but I didn't hear anything else. And I said to them, basically, what you've got to say to me is, I found that a little bit upsetting and I'd like an apology from you. And then for me, it's like, oh, apology, sure, okay. I'm happy to do that. But unless it's really communicated very clearly and quite bluntly to me, I don't get it. And I know that we all sort of learnt, well, a lot of us learnt years and years ago, decades ago, how to ask people a question and then, or how to talk to somebody, particularly a sponsor, and then ask them, well, what do you understand from what I've said? Not in those terms so much, but you know what I'm saying. You want them to repeat it back so that that they've understood it. Now, is this still happening, or have we lost some of this?
I think there, and I've definitely been at fault of this, is that it seemed like it would be really insulting to
Yes.
ask someone I've just told something to repeat it back to me. However, I've also realized having certain staff members or people is that when I get them to repeat it back to me, that's when I realize there's a gap.
Yes.
It's almost the same as sometimes when you kind of spy over their paper and see what they wrote down, you're like, oh, this is an interesting way of writing it. And you want to take, sometimes you want, well, I do want to take over their pen and write it for them and all of that sort of stuff. It's a control thing. But then you realize that then they haven't understood it. So if you rewrite it for them, that doesn't necessarily mean they might understand that it's something different. But again, it's how they've comprehended it.
Yes.
And I like that story that you brought up, because I think that there is a little bit of, you know, we are more aware of neurodiversity these days. As a kind of a thing, but not realizing necessarily what that requires and that a message hasn't been given. And so, yes, people who are on the autistic spectrum tend to take things very literally if you don't tell them directly. It's not that they want to hurt your feelings.
No.
It is that they just didn't read the other language going on.
Yeah.
So it's also interesting when you talk about this in cross, like multicultural or cross-cultural organizations and teams. There is a cultural concept, and we're talking about societal culture, called high context or low context, cultural factors.
Right.
So a high context cultural, like communication style, is that everybody kind of already knows what the story is. Right. It's like somebody will say something and everybody will like, and everyone knows what that means. No one has to say anything, because the context is rich and everybody has the same understanding of that context, right? So, for example, sometimes it can be muttering under the breath, or not even muttering under the breath. It could be like a little eyebrow thing in some cultures, very subtle, especially in stoic cultures. But everybody knows you offended someone because their eyebrow twitched a particular way or something like that. Which is different from what's considered a low context communication style. This means we assume. And so when sometimes you have communications, even written communications, there'll be a low context communicator requires the information to be really laid out for them. It's this, then this, then this, and this, and this, and this. There are no assumptions there. This is the thing. A high context person will be like, wow, you're really direct, and did you have to really specify everything out? Like, surely everybody knows that. Now, we all play high context and low context, so it is not like people are only one, generally.
Right. So you can mix that, because if you're at home, you're not needing the full context necessarily when you're at work, maybe.
Yeah. So exactly. So when you're like with siblings, especially if they're close, you'll tend to notice there's a lot of inside jokes.
Yeah.
They can say one word and everybody knows what the joke is. Yeah.
Yep.
That's high context communication, because all of that is already built. We know that that's what's going on. That's what they're meaning. If you say that same joke to a complete stranger.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the way I like to explain it, because then it makes it not like this country versus that country, or it makes it neurodiverse versus non-neurodiverse. It's we all do it in different aspects, and we have different levels of it, and therefore, you know, sometimes, you know, it's when you're close to someone and you say something and they don't know what the inside joke is, and they're like, huh? You were using a high context communication and they have no background context, or they can't figure out which one you're talking about, and they're like, I don't know why that's funny.
So let me give you another scenario to relate it back to project and program management, for example. I would think that, and in my experience, to be what I probably would think is politically savvy, is when I've got a sponsor who's usually someone very senior in the organisation, I become very aware of what the external factors are to them. And I mean, sometimes it's outside of the organisation as well, depending on the organisation. And then what are the interplays between them and other executives? And sometimes the CEO is fine, but there's hostility happening over here at this side that's never really articulated. You can just feel it's there in a meeting. And I mean, that's probably something that I've been reasonably good at understanding and picking up, because at that level, generally, a CEO of a large company like BHP or something, where I've worked, they don't have time to muck about. They're more like me, and they're very short and sharp and direct. And do you understand what I'm saying? Yes. Off you go. But other places and other people, project managers, are not necessarily in front of those that are quite as senior with those different skills. Now, am I giving, firstly, the right sort of example or scenario for political savviness? And secondly, if you can tell me, if we're as project managers, how are we going to enhance our understanding and develop this skill a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. So you really point out something important, right? That different layers of the organization tend to, not always, tend to have different priorities, different stakeholders, different levels of sophistication in their own power management and influence. Yeah. Normally, a CEO of a large company is quite influential and understands enough of this, because otherwise they would have never gotten there in the first place.
Yeah.
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 Middle managers, they may be as savvy as that, but they may not be, right? So then it's also them sometimes being aware. Sometimes you get great middle managers who are very good from a tactical point of view. They're not used to having to do with the strategy. And then strategy also leads into often the who of who holds what powers and responsibilities within an organization.
Right.
If you can't get so-and-so who's very influential in the accounting team, in the marketing team, or whatever else, to buy in, good luck getting the rest of the team to buy in.
Yes.
They might say, oh yeah, that's a really great idea. But if their organizational chain up the line is not rewarding that, is not backing that up, is not enthusiastic about that, or even not a detractor from that, you're always going to run into it. People might say, oh yeah, that's great, such a great idea, yeah, the project, we really need this. Why can't we get it to stick? Because somebody with power, right, who does have the power of carrot and stick of people in their line, right? So knowing that, right? So yeah, so these things that sometimes people know it instinctively, and sometimes people need to do it with a pen and paper and map it all out, right? I would encourage people always to map it out, because sometimes even if you think you know it instinctively, the exercise of knowing who holds what powers, and sometimes that's official power. Like if you need the CFO to sign something off because that's the only thing the CEO, then it's a very clear one, because it'll be written in the structure of the organization.
Exactly.
However, there's also influence, like that CFO might have certain trusted people that they listen to and they take advice from, and they always check in on their opinion before they make it a really important decision, right? Those people may not have official powers. You know, that could be somebody that is very technically good. It could be somebody who is very wise. It could be somebody in a completely different sector who's going to give them the counterpoints.
Yeah.
So knowing who, it's almost like who listens to who is engaged and can approach other people.
Yeah.
And then there are people who are their own little islands on their own who don't interact. One of the ones that, again, this is where it gets the political bit, the dirty politics, is knowing who has influence that's not necessarily official. That's the one when they have a little thing, there's a little, and often they know a lot of gossip. Why? Because they're connected. They know what's going on. They know that this person and that person looked at each other funny because somebody was not happy about something else in a meeting, right? They've got their ear to the ground. So how they use that information, that's the ethical part, right? For people to be politically savvy, it's to know what those whispers are, where those lines are, which information goes which way, right? Who has influence over other people. And then knowing where it is, and then if you need to tap into it, then you can tap into it. But again, it's not necessarily that you're going to use it for something nefarious or something horrible. Maybe you're trying to get people to realize that they need to do something a bit more environmentally friendly. right?
Yep.
Knowing that somebody just had a new kid and this is their first kid. So now they're going to start worrying about what happens to the future generations. Before that, they might not have cared. But now you're talking about, well, you've had your first child or your first grandchild. Now you might care more about future generations of things. How do we talk to you about something that you might care about because this has suddenly become a big thing in your life, right?
Yes. I think we don't consider the changes in other people's lives, particularly even on long projects, where we've named the stakeholders, somebody's done all the stakeholder analysis, which is quite different, I think, to what you're talking about. But we don't often check in again over time to make sure, again, like transformation, to make sure that they're still okay. I just want to add too that I often make sure on a transformation program that I know who's paying the bills, and I don't mean who is the delegated authority to sign the checks. I'm talking about who actually in admin does something about it. And you'd be amazed how important that has been in getting my projects through. But do they ever appear on anybody's stakeholder analysis? No. No.
So that's where mapping it. So it's a different mapping from stakeholder. You can start off with
Yes.
your stakeholder mapping, but then you're adding things in. Like there
Yep.
was a big thing that's always like, if you want the CEO and you want a meeting with the CEO, the person that you need to be nicest to is who? The EA.
Exactly.
Right?
And they're so often overlooked.
Yep,
They're overlooked. They're not put in.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And then knowing the things about them that, again, we often tend to map stakeholders just on their positions. Occasionally we are aware of, a particular person in that role and their preferences,
Yeah.
but we tend to be very professional about it, right?
Yeah.
And we only say, well, they're supposed to be the person who cares about this and is responsible for this. But there are certain factors that make people listen more, right? It can be as simple as there are certain people you don't try and talk to them before they've had their coffee.
Yes.
Forget it,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So
Exactly.
there's that subtlety in there that is generally about engaging. So that is the engaging part, right? As opposed to sometimes the communication part is like, if you are not the best messenger, who might be the best messenger, right? What's going on in again, the context. So what we have is a concept that when we're exposed to a particular idea, it becomes normalized. And so, for example, why something that was fashionable 15 years ago looks funny now is because they've shifted the hemline or something up over
Yeah.
time, and our
Yeah.
brains have gotten used to what looks normal. So it's the same thing. So what are these people being exposed to? If they're watching a lot of stuff on AI, their brain's going to be a particular way. And now we have so much personalization going on in people's social media, in their news feeds, in
Mm.
everything. It's like, well,
Mm.
what are they reading? What are they thinking about? What philosophies or the way the world is being painted for them in what they're consuming and what they're being exposed to?
Yeah.
It's going to shape what they see as the next thing, right?
Mm.
So
Mm.
there's a little bit of predictability or, being aware what could be the next prediction of what's important to them. That's why there's a lot of people saying, oh, is my phone listening to me? Because, it's starting to advertise me things that I've been thinking about. It's like, I don't know if it read that it read your mind. It could be even worse than that they've seeded the idea in there for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, I mean, to sum all of this up, I'll get you to sum it up in a second. And if you're out there watching, please subscribe to the channel and give us a thumbs up. That would be most appreciated because I really do have some exceptional people on the channel like you, Cassandra. Thank you so much. But it does sound like it's another component to change, but also being aware yourself of what your surroundings are. And what are some of the real benefits to, like, somebody in my audience, a project manager or a sponsor? Can you give me some, maybe 3 benefits?
Absolutely. One is that you'll find that your messages land better, right? By being aware of who and what are the other influences on somebody else, you can get decision makers to maybe be more open to an
Right.
idea, because they might not be, especially if you're a change manager, right? Change fatigue is such a big thing these days.
Yeah.
Like, oh, great, another change manager. They're going to come in, they're going to mess things around for about 6 months, and then and then 18 months later, we can go back to what we were doing.
Yeah.
Because that change manager will be gone, right?
Yeah.
So a change manager sometimes really struggles to get that time and to get the buy-in and to get the commitment because of change fatigue. So therefore, who are the people who are around key other people who can support them in that structure change, where because they can see a value, not the change for the sake of the change, but they can see their own personal benefits from that, they're going to start influencing other people around them. So you're kind of looking at, it's almost like if you say like the little groups, right? And whether they're professional groups or social groups, it's still the same thing. It's knowing them, people saying, okay, well, actually that might be, it's better for us. We should probably do that. Yeah, I think also that being there, how would I say this? Okay, so I think that recognizing that people who understand the politics and the context of what's going on and who are all the players, it does not necessarily mean that you are an unethical, bad person, right? That's why we want to emphasize political savvy. The knowing and being aware of it is the first thing. So if you can recognize it and you can understand what the players are doing on the board, it gives you the choice about what options you want to take, as opposed to being sort of like taken unaware by them and then feeling like you're losing control or being controlled away from what you want to be doing.
Excellent point. Yep.
There are some times that you can see there's some political game, and as you're making that conscious decision of, oh, I'm not touching that one, but the conscious decision, not the, my default is just to avoid, right? So making that decision, do I want to avoid it? How do I mitigate against it because it's in contra to what I am trying to do? So how do I need to balance that out? Do I need to be more actively engaged in this, or am I like surfing the wave? Like that wave is going the way I want it to go.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't agree necessarily with the ethics of a particular person's way of doing it, but if they're going to kind of carve a path for you, right? What are the benefits and the drawbacks of getting involved, as opposed to, again, most people who are like, oh, politics, they just avoid the whole lot, and then they're missing sort of the things that could actually help them move on and move up and communicate and build relationships.
Look, I think this is incredibly valuable, all of this conversation, because it sort of pulls everything together from what I've heard you talk about. I'm not sure that all change adoption specialists actually do this that you're doing, not in my experience anyway, because it really is factoring in a lot of those cultural dynamics, like you were saying, the political stuff, like you were saying. I always used to say to my people, you need to understand the game, because we are consultants. You go in, you need to understand what the game is. You don't have to play the game, but you have to understand it. And sometimes, I would say as the CEO, we're not playing in that little pond there. I don't like what those people are doing, so I pull you all out. I did that once or twice. But it's very important to know where you are and the surroundings. So I think that's very valuable information that you gave. Now, we're going to wrap up now, but is there a summary that you can give us? Because just as I'm saying that, at the heart of it is in your précis, it's all about trust and credibility earned through consistency, transparency, and a commitment to shared outcomes. Can we all do it, Cassandra?
I think there has to be an intention to want to.
Right.
I mean, sometimes people are in jobs and they honestly don't care about what outcomes. As long as they get my paycheck, I got other things going on in life, right?
Yeah.
So there is a little bit of how do you get people to buy in enough to a shared outcome if you're trying to get a shared outcome? Otherwise it's just a lot of effort for what? I think that there's a lot of potential, and I think people are sometimes unaware that they are already doing it because they're not consciously doing it. And
Right.
so therefore there might just be, it's a little bit of, okay, hang on, wait, what is this? And can I use this proactively and conscientiously and strategically, rather than, you know, some of the communication habits that we have, or we are able to adapt. We just don't consciously choose them sometimes.
Yes, very good. And that's a really good wrap up, I think. It's something for all of us to look at and search ourselves. Cassandra's details on how to contact her will be in the description below in the YouTube channel. And again, thank you so much, Cassandra. That was so valuable. I really appreciate it. And if anyone's got any questions out there, please send us an email, try and contact me. And if you need, I can put you into contact with Cassandra. Other than that, everyone have a great project day.